Chang. This is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, the Trump administration rolls out its budget proposal with $3.6 trillion slashed from U.S. safety net programs. We'll analyze the potential impacts on tech. Plus, Uber swerves into yet another bump in the road, this time costing the company millions. And Microsoft's more powerful 5th-generation Surface Pro hits markets next month, but will a battery boost power a surge in profit? We'll preview the device and its potential. First to our lead. U.S. stocks pushed ahead with small gains, rising for the 4th day in a row, despite news of that terror attack out of Manchester. Let's get straight to our Bloomberg News stocks reporter, Abigail Doolittle in New York. So, Abigail, give us the roundup today. What happened in trading?
Well, Emily, it was really a pretty quiet day for stocks here in the U.S. We had the Dow, S&P 500, and the Nasdaq finish fractionally higher, and not really much of a reaction to that terror tragedy. This is pretty consistent with what we've seen over the last year, or even more so. Perhaps investors weighing in, saying that that tragedy is unlikely to affect the corporate profit outlook for U.S. companies, and therefore not a big reaction. In fact, those small gains. And we also had the VIX, or the fear gauge for the S&P 500, plus the VIX 100 for the Nasdaq 100 trading both lower. So not a lot of fear there. Another way to look at it, actually, some of the high beta names included in the Nasdaq, the highest beta names, including Skyworks, NVIDIA, and Netflix. We see that both Skyworks and Netflix traded higher. NVIDIA was lower, but Paul Sweeney, a Bloomberg intelligence analyst, the head of research, he says that the high beta names in real macro risk-off situations tend to trade down significantly. We're not really seeing a reaction here, and that reaction from NVIDIA, that really has more to do with weakness for the chip sector. In fact, when we take a look at the stocks on the day, we see that was a pretty bumpy road here for the stocks, at the lows down more than 1%, finishing down about 0.4%, so not a huge decline there. But that, Emily, was much more related to company-specific action as opposed to anything to do with that terror tragedy in Manchester.
What about chip stocks? They underperformed. What happened there?
Well, you know, this really came down to a few company-specific stories. First, Xilinx shares finished down more than 5%, the worst day in more than a year. This after Wells Fargo downgraded shares to a market perform. The analysts there citing valuation plus lackluster growth opportunities. Plus, Morgan Stanley, the analyst there, has been relatively bullish, but conceded that the analyst day yesterday was a bit disappointing, so those shares fell. We also had AMD down once again. The stock has been a bit weak after its rocket ride over the last year, up in a huge way, but more recently down. And the cause for the weakness today, Citi reiterating its sell rating, saying that they think it's unlikely that the expected Intel deal comes through for AMD, so those shares fell. Lots of other chip names lower, too. This could really weigh if it continues. We saw a sell-off for the stocks in April. It did weigh on the major averages. If we hop into the Bloomberg and take a look at hashtag BTV 8808, we see a beautiful one-year uptrend for the stocks. But more recently, on that bumpy ride back in April, we see that that uptrend has started to reverse with the stocks below it. This tells us that the buyers are starting to fade. And if the sellers decide to aggressively move in, it could really cause some more volatile action, perhaps a decent decline to the downside. That matters in turn because, as you know, right now, technology is the top sector this year, the top sector in the Trump trade. So it's very important that the strength in chips holds up. But this chart may suggest that there could be some volatility ahead. And then very quickly, Emily, right here after the in the after-hour post-market trading, we do have the shares of Intuit popping sharply higher after the tax and accounting software maker boosted its full-year forecast. And investors are clearly cheering this, considering it was a bit of a slow tax season. But they're saying that demand for their accounting software is very strong. So we do have those shares popping sharply higher again in the post-market, Emily.
All right, our Bloomberg News stocks reporter Abigail Doolittle there with the roundup. Thanks so much, Abigail. Now out of Washington, President Trump unveiled his first full budget detailing massive cuts totaling $3.6 trillion over a decade. The proposals would have far-reaching effects on industries that impact tech, like infrastructure, healthcare, security spending. Office of Management and Budget Director Mick Mulvaney spoke at the White House and explained the motivations behind the plan.
And the Trumponomics is part of the foundation here. What is it? It's sustained 3% economic growth. Everything that we do in this administration, every single time I am called into the Oval Office, whether it's on immigration policy, healthcare policy, tax reform policy, trade policy, budgets and spending, the focus is sustained 3% economic growth.
Joining us right now from the White House, our Bloomberg reporter Tolu Olorunnipa. Tolu, first of all, talk to us a little bit about the impact that this budget specifically would have on some of the sectors we care about, like security, like infrastructure.
Yeah, this budget does have a large number of cuts, but the president wanted to focus a lot on both security when it comes to security from foreign threats. So there's large increases for military spending. Military contracts can be expected to increase under this budget, as well as cybersecurity. There's $1.5 billion for a new cybersecurity unit within the Department of Homeland Security. There's also about $200 billion in tax dollars for infrastructure spending as part of the president's $1 trillion infrastructure plan. The rest of that money is expected to come from the private sector. But the president is cutting a lot of the social safety net programs. He's saying that his idea is to focus more on defense and less on domestic spending, and he believes that he'll be able to get the economy growing so that people won't need as many of those social safety net programs.
Meantime, solar tax credits were extended for 7 years. What's not getting cut?
Yeah, the president is focusing on certain programs that both Democrats and Republicans can get behind. Things like the paid family leave proposal that the president put into its budget is a bipartisan program that would increase spending on paid family leave, things like solar tax credits, which Democrats support. But for the most part, the Environmental Protection Agency is likely to get a very large cut, as well as several agencies that focus on climate change and climate science. So there are several cuts to the science portion of the budget, but the president has focused on a few areas, including solar, where he has not made those drastic cuts.
Now, the proposal does involve cutting the FCC's budget and directing the agency to auction off more spectrum licenses. What are the implications of this?
Yes, the president's budget includes a 5% cut in spending at the FCC. This would reduce the size and probably lead to layoffs, or at least a reduction in the staff size at the FCC. So you could see fewer FCC actions, and you could also see the FCC auctioning off more spectrum. That's something that the mobile wireless companies might be interested in. But one caveat is that this is a proposal from the president, which is going to go to Congress, and Congress is going to likely take a lot of its own liberty with this proposal and decide what to keep and what to strike out. And from what we're hearing from Congress, they're likely to focus on using their own priorities and writing their own budget bill before the budget funding runs out in September.
So how long do we expect that process to take?
Well, it could depend on how close the negotiators from both parties are able to get over the next few months. What we're hearing is that the president's budget is likely dead on arrival in the Congress, and that could help to bring negotiators to the table, because Democrats have largely said that this budget is not something that they're even willing to negotiate over because there are so many cuts in it. But once Republicans and Democrats can agree on some top-line numbers and agree to not cut as many programs as the president wants to cut over the next few months, you can likely expect them to come to some kind of agreement either over the summer or into the fall. They have that hard deadline in September when the funding runs out, so that's going to put some pressure on them to come to a deal before then.
All right, our Bloomberg News White House reporter Tolu Olorunnipa joining us there from D.C. Thanks so much, Tolu, for that report. Coming up, a former Uber veteran just completed funding on his latest startup, why he says self-storage is the next industry set for disruption. And Bloomberg Tech is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. in the hot seat again. The company is admitting to shortchanging its New York City drivers millions of dollars by improperly calculating the company's share of passenger fares. Turns out Uber was taking its cut of fares based on the pre-tax sum instead of after taxes and fees, as stated in its terms of service. Uber will pay its drivers back $900 each, which will cost the company tens of millions of dollars. And Uber facing trouble abroad as well. Israel is indicting Uber for allegedly offering illegal rides. According to a ministry statement, the company picked up passengers for a fee without a government license. Undercover agents have been posing as passengers for several months. The UberX ride-sharing service is illegal in Israel, where drivers are banned from charging for rides in private cars. Instead, Uber has been offering its Uber Night service in Tel Aviv, where passengers pay private car drivers a reimbursement for things like gas. Uber launched its service in Israel in August 2014, attempting to lure users away from the local rival, Get. In today's latest funding board, a new startup is trying to make its name in the $30 billion self-storage market. Trove, a San Francisco-based startup, has raised $8 million in Series A funding from Greylock Partners. It was founded by Michael Powell, the former head of product at Uber, who just left the company last year. Michael joins me now here in the studio, so I have to ask you about Uber first. It's been in the news. You are credited with coming up for the idea behind surge pricing, and there's still a lot of debate today between the difference in what drivers get versus what passengers pay. What's your take on just the fact that it doesn't seem like this point has been settled yet?
So with surge pricing happens around us every day. And so the original idea was on a late night in Boston. The bars close actually around 1:45 every weekend. And we couldn't satisfy all that demand. And so in order to get the drivers to come out, we actually had to try paying them more. And it turns out that when you increase rates, demand goes down, supply goes up. And it's something that happens around us every day with hotels, with storage. It's just a common practice that Uber didn't invent. I didn't invent the idea of supply and demand. It's something that taught to me in Econ 101 in college.
But do you think Uber supply is important, right? Do you think Uber has to answer to these drivers who just don't feel like they've been treated fairly, time and again?
So at the end of the day, marketplaces are all about supply. I wrote a blog post about a year ago now that said supply is the foundation of a great marketplace. And so at the end of the day, Uber doesn't have a product without supply. In my case, we started a company, Trove, that partners with professional moving and storage companies. And without their backing, without their commitment, we have no service. And
talk to me about what you learned at Uber that you're applying to Trove.
Sure. So with Uber, the opportunity was to network black cars. They were around us every day. You might remember taking a black car and having a black car wait for you for an hour at the airport. Then they would come get you, drive you 10 minutes, and they might wait an hour or two everywhere else. These things are offline. So similar, moving and storage is a category that hasn't changed for dozens of years. Typically, if you store today, you have to go rent a unit, you have to go rent a truck, buy the boxes, and then you have to call your friends. And usually that's offline too. You can use messaging apps these days. I don't know about you. When I call my friends, they don't really pick up if it's for moving and storage help. And so in this case, it's bringing that technology to their business and actually connecting them with more customers. So
there are some competitors out there, Clutter, MakeSpace. What is your value proposition? What do you offer that nobody else does?
Sure. When you look at a competitor like a Clutter or MakeSpace, what they've taken as an approach is a vertically integrated approach. Clutter and MakeSpace, as far as I know, they lease and own warehouses, lease and own trucks, and they employ drivers. We're taking a page from other marketplaces, such as Uber, to connect moving and storage companies with customers. In our case, by connecting them with customers, we can drive them more business, fill excess capacity, and help them expand and grow their business and create more jobs.
What about when it comes to culture? What page will you be taking from Uber when it comes to that?
So culture is something that Uber taught me dearly, where it's something that's set at the very early stages of your company. And so John, my co-founder and CTO, and I probably spent the first 2 weeks of our company just talking about culture every day. And for us, we want a culture that really ties back to what the customer wants. And in the storage category, what a customer wants is honesty, empathy, Heck, moving is one of those things that's one of the most stressful things you could go through your life. So they just want someone to lean on when they're going through one of these tricky transitions.
How about stepping on toes? Is that going to be one of your cultural mottos?
Stepping on toes, we actually have 6. It is currently not. But at the end of the day, we do believe deeply in something like ownership. Owners, for example, empowering moving and storage companies. And internally at Trove, we also believe in taking the extra step to complete something and get it done.
Now, when you were look, there's been a lot of discussion about the Uber culture, and did the Uber culture, this hard-charging culture, lead to the problems that it has today? Did you see any early warning signs that things could get off track?
So, unfortunately, I haven't been at Uber.
You were there for 4 years, so that's what that's why I'm asking.
So, all I can say about that is, again, cultures are founded and set at the very early stages. And at Trove, what we're trying to do is set that foundation that's really customer-centric. That's all about empathy and honesty.
SoftBank just raised almost $100 billion to invest in tech. Curious what your thoughts are on the fundraising landscape right now. How easy is it or not to get money? It seems like there's a lot of money stored up in the coffers.
It's also another great question that I'm probably not the best position to answer. We're lucky enough to have a great partner, Greylock Partners, that invested in our first round of financing last year. We raised $8 million from them. And so for us, we've known Greylock for years now, and they're fortunate enough to be partners with us. And so I can't comment on the fundraising landscape, in that we're currently just heads down building our product and service.
All right. Well, excited to see it all pan out. Michael Powell, co-founder of Trove, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Emily. Take care.
Bitcoin continues its record run. The cryptocurrency has jumped to a new all-time high, its value more than doubling since March. Speaking at an industry event, the CEO of blockchain, Peter Smith, said the recent rally is being driven partially by investors moving out of riskier digital assets and into more established cryptocurrency. Coming up, we sit down with Wells Fargo CEO Tim Sloan for an exclusive interview. Which jobs in banking will be replaced by robots in the next 5 to 10 years? We'll get his take next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg.
Hi, my name's Ashley.
Hello, Ashley. I am a socially intelligent robot.
Ashley Vance is going to the farthest corners of Earth.
This is the UFO.
What am I going to find inside? You get Wi-Fi out here?
To find the mad scientists, the tech geniuses, and the dreamers of tomorrow.
It's about high-tech innovation and doing really, really clever things.
Hello, world. Friday on Bloomberg.
America's biggest lender, Wells Fargo, is 8 months into an effort to rebound from the worst scandal in its 165-year history, the discovery of 3.5 million fake accounts. In the wake of the scandal, Wells Fargo eliminated some incentives for retail bankers, changed the unit's compensation structure, shook up management, and denied bonuses to top executives. All the while, the bank is also focusing on growth in machine learning and AI. Bloomberg's editor-at-large, Eric Schatzker, caught up with Wells Fargo CEO Tim Sloan for an exclusive interview. He asked Sloan which job functions will be replaced by computers 5 to 10 years from now.
Any function that is repetitive, right, can be done as well by a machine as by a human. I think any function that requires judgment, that requires listening, that requires empathy, can be done only by a human. And so I think you're going to see our business continue to evolve. That's why we're so excited about the innovation that we're bringing to our customers. But there is always going to be a place in our industry for human contact.
So today, if you looked at those 273,000 people,
right,
how many of those jobs are repetitive?
Oh, I don't know off the top of my head. But again, to the extent that we have a role that's repetitive that could be replaced by a machine over time, that's not to say that we're not going to create new roles.
Jobs. No, I understand.
For example, our payments virtual solutions and innovation group, that didn't exist 9 months ago, right? The way that we have more innovators at this, and we have 31,000 people in that group right now.
Why is it so important for Wells Fargo to be the first mover in technology. You're spending a whole lot of money on improving the consumer experience. Sure. Why is that so important? Because every bank is going to have that technology eventually.
Sure. I think I hope that's the case, by the way, because that's going to provide better services and experience to our customers. But that's why we want to do it, because that's what our customers want us to do. We have the best branch network in the country. Right? There's no question about that. Our customers love using the branch network. But you know what else they like? They like using our mobile capabilities. We were voted #1 by Keynote this year. They like using our online capabilities. We brought online banking to the industry in the mid-90s. So we've been innovating for a long time. The reason we want to do it is because that's what our customers want.
Our Bloomberg editor-at-large there, Eric Schatzker, with Wells Fargo CEO Tim Sloan. Coming up, major testimonies at the Capitol are bringing more heat to ties between Trump and Russia. We will dive into what the former CIA director has to say on Russia's cyber meddling. And just a feature I want you to check out, our interactive TV function. Find it at TV Go on the Bloomberg. You can watch us live. If you miss an interview, you can go back and check it out. You can send our producers a message. You can send me a question. Play along with the charts we bring you on air. This is for Bloomberg subscribers only. Check it out at TV Go. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's start with a check of your first word news. President Trump's proposed 2018 budget arrived on Capitol Hill, with Office of Management and Budget Director Mick Mulvaney defending the $3.6 trillion budget cuts. The proposed is being criticized for slashing U.S. safety net programs. Mulvaney says the policies will put the unemployed back into the workforce. British Prime Minister Theresa May raised the nation's threat level, saying another attack may be, quote, imminent. That's after the suicide bombing last night. The terror threat level was raised from severe to critical. Authorities have identified 22-year-old resident Salman Abedi as the suspect. French President Emmanuel Macron is holding meetings with unions and business organizations to discuss reforming the country's labor market. Macron pledged to reform the labor market during his campaign. French unemployment has hovered around 10% for years. A former Ethiopian Minister of Health has been elected as the next Director General of the World Health Organization. Dr. Tedros is the first African tapped to lead the UN Health Agency. On June 30th, he succeeds China's Margaret Chan, who held the post for 10 years. The NFL has moved the 2021 Super Bowl from L.A. to Tampa Bay. The move reportedly comes after delays pushed the opening of a $2.6 billion football stadium in Inglewood, California, to 2020. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti, and this is Bloomberg. Just after 5:30 p.m. Tuesday here in Washington, 7:30 Wednesday morning in Sydney. We are joined by Bloomberg's Paul Allen with a look at the markets. Paul, good morning.
Good morning, Elisa. The ASX futures are pointing up a little, about 0.2% at the moment. We'll be keeping an eye on BHP at the open. This is after media reports that it's hired Barclays to sell its US shale assets. Important to note that those reports are unconfirmed, and BHP's offered no comment. The New Zealand dollar edged back above 70 cents overnight. This is just as we wait on the April trade balance. That's expected to show a slight decline to $267 million. Over in Japan, Nikkei futures pointing a little higher. Elsewhere in Asia, keep an eye on Noble Group out of Singapore. The commodity trader was put in a trading halt on Tuesday. This is pending an announcement today, and that's after S&P warned of a possible default, and that prompted a rather dramatic collapse in Noble Group's share price. I'm Paul Allen in Sydney. More from Bloomberg Technology next.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Former CIA Director John Brennan testified before the House Intelligence Committee Tuesday. For the first time, Brennan publicly said he was concerned about possible ties between Russia and the Trump campaign, saying that Russia, quote, brazenly interfered in U.S. elections, including actively contacting members of President Trump's campaign. But he stopped shy of calling it, quote, collusion. He also said he was concerned over reports that President Trump shared classified information with the Russians during a meeting in the Oval Office on May 10th.
And I don't know what was shared or said in the Oval Office, but if the reports in the press are true that Mr. Trump decided to spontaneously share some intelligence with the Russians, I think he would have basically violated two protocols.
Our Bloomberg News reporter Terrence Stopp joins us now from the White House, from Washington, with all the details. Terrence, first of all, what were the biggest revelations from the testimony today?
Afternoon. Well, I think the big takeaway that a lot of people had was the sort of early on concern that Brennan expressed, this idea that he was confronting Russian officials as far back as August about these concerns, and the expression he used was pull at the threads, that they knew way back then that they had to start pulling at some threads to see what was going on here. I think that was sort of a wake-up call or sort of, a new revelation for people.
The timeline, as you mentioned here, seems to be worthy. Did we get any more information about how intelligence officials handled these revelations at the time? He often said that he would have preferred to talk about some of this stuff in closed session, and I'm just wondering what happened behind closed doors.
Well, they came out of the closed-door meeting, and Mike Conaway and Adam Schiff, the two top-ranking members of that committee, declined to speak. There were several times where Brennan said, that's classified information. I would much rather discuss that in our closed session. And they kept pretty well to that script of, classified information, because they kind of came out with a sort of brush off, no comment right now.
The White House did release this comment saying this morning's hearings back up what we've been saying all along, that despite a year of investigation, there is still no evidence of any Russia-Trump campaign collusion. Brennan today was repeatedly pressed for names, but he wouldn't give any of them up. What's your take on that?
Well, particularly Trey Gowdy, a congressman who made a name for himself during the Benghazi hearings into Hillary Clinton. He repeatedly pressed for specific names, and that was when Brennan was really parrying that one back. And he said again that was sort of a classified, something to be done in a classified setting. I don't think the Republicans on the committee were quite satisfied with that answer.
No, Brennan said also repeatedly that Russia's meddling in cyberspace is obvious and happens out in the open. Did we get any more color on how it can be handled or prevented?
Voter information were between Brennan and the committee members. Now, what's interesting is Brennan said that today that this is a pattern going back many, many decades, was the exact phrase he used. And that it's so, I think another turn of a phrase that he used occasionally was insidious. It's just, he said that sometimes people who are being sort of cultivated as an intelligence asset don't even realize it and may unwittingly be an intelligence asset.
Last question, any line of sight on when former FBI Director James Comey will be testifying?
Yeah, there really is no line of sight. Now, I know in the Senate they had said they were trying to get something together after Memorial Day. And in the House right now, some scheduled testimony was put off.
All right.
So we'll check back in on that.
All right, Terrence Stopp from Washington. Thanks so much, Terrence, for that report. Staying now in Washington, Postmates CEO Bastian Lehman testified before Congress earlier, making the case for integrating robotics into his business model of on-demand deliveries. Back in January, Postmates, along with DoorDash, teamed up with Starship Technologies to test delivery via self-driving robots. But the emergence of automation in the workplace has also sparked regulatory concerns around safety, as well as fears around the displacement of human workers. I started by asking Lehman about this fear and how he imagines robots integrating into the Postmates delivery network.
If I paint a picture probably in 10 years from now, which is more exciting, I think we will have what we believe is a sidewalk class robot that will do a lot of the ultra short range deliveries. Highly dense metropolitan areas is where we believe we can deploy our sidewalk class robots in the most efficient way. These are often deliveries that are probably not suited for human labor. They're relatively short. I think the return as monetary value for the workforce is not as great, and this is where we think we can have the biggest impact.
So what do you have to say to the Elon Musks or the Stephen Hawkings of the world who have concerns that robots will eventually supersede humans or perhaps even become us?
I mean, I think it's all a question of timeline, right? I think Elon is right in his remarks that we have to be careful, specifically when it comes to AI. And I believe that things that he tries to fund, like OpenAI and together with Sam Altman, they're great ways to get the knowledge out there to a broader base of people and not just have too intelligent, isolated AI operating somewhere. When it comes to the robots, I think they already augment our life, right? Automation happened a while ago. And while there are some areas where we still have to explore the impact, there are others where I believe automation can't come fast enough. There are jobs that are simply not safe enough or secure enough for humans to perform these tasks, and I think that is something positive that we should focus on.
Bill Gates has proposed that governments should tax robot workers just like they tax human workers. What do you think about that proposal?
I think there's definitely an interesting discussion to be had here, and I think there's a time and a place for this discussion. Where I believe we are right now is we're still in the phase of experimentation. So we talked to Congress about not putting too many roadblocks into the cities, into the communities and municipal areas so that we can at least explore the impact and to what degree we will have robots performing deliveries in the future that allows us to collect some data, that allows us to have deep analysis. And I think then, once we understand the impact and how we can augment and use robots in our cities, we can have a discussion if we need to find a way to tax them or if we need to do anything else to protect the workforce that we have today. But I think we should agree on that we need to appreciate and we need to bear hug the future.
Well, there are still questions about whether the Postmates model can scale. Can you give us some concrete numbers that show progress you're making in that area?
Yeah, I think it scales well. I mean, these are external questions. These are obviously not questions that we ask ourselves. But look, Emily, we're doing over 2 million deliveries now per month. This year, we will move $1 billion in commerce on the Postmates platform. We paid out $300 million in income to Postmates on the platform. We're in 44 markets across the U.S. and we're attacking international territory in Q3. So I think the platform scales. And it is something that customers love and appreciate.
What about your plans for international expansion? You know, you had talked about launching in London. That hasn't happened yet. Is that still going to happen? And if so, when?
You will definitely see us launch internationally. I think that we have been more concentrated on penetrating the U.S. market. Ultimately, that's a decision that we did earlier this year. But we will launch outside the U.S. I'm not sure if Europe is the first market, but you can think of it as definitely a market of interest for us.
My conversation there with Postmates CEO Bastian Lehman. It was this day in tech 15 years ago that Netflix made its public debut. Back then, it was simply a DVD rental service, and since then the stock has had a strong run, but not without its stumbles. Netflix stock lost nearly 80% of its value between July and November 2011 after it raised subscription fees and attempted to split up DVD and streaming services. Still, the company is a massive growth story. Its stock has risen 40% each year on average since the IPO. Coming up, Microsoft unveiled a new Surface Pro to give its aging product line a little spark. Will the device boost the tech giant's sales? This is Bloomberg. That's next. Microsoft is refreshing its Surface Pro. At an event in Shanghai, the tech giant unveiled a new laptop-tablet hybrid with more powerful chips and better battery life. Microsoft also announced a special version of Windows 10 that lets the Chinese government use its own encryption on its computers. Bloomberg's brand new Seattle bureau chief, Dina Bass, joins us now from Seattle with more. And longtime Microsoft reporter, of course. Dina, congratulations on the bureau chief gig. But first of all, how is the Surface doing?
You'll remember when Microsoft reported earnings in April, they had a 26% decline in Surface revenue. And the reason is that the Surface Pro, which is kind of the workhorse of their line, that's their volume play, the version that was out in the market had been getting pretty old. And so people weren't buying it. They were either buying other Windows 2-in-1s or they were buying the Apple iPad Pro. And so they really kind of needed a refresh here. So that's what we got today out of the Shanghai event.
How important is hardware still to Microsoft?
Look, this is it was a $4 billion business for them last fiscal year. It's been quite a focus in addition to revenue, just in terms of coming up with new categories where they can show what Windows can do. And, this category, this 2-in-1, a laptop tablet hybrid, was sort of a category that they pioneered and Apple stepped in too late. And, they've sort of been losing ground again because of this sort of aging portfolio. So this new version ups the battery life by about 50%. It has the new Intel Kaby Lake chips, and it combines some of the interesting, compelling features from some of the other Surface products. Like it's got the sort of luxury material on the keyboard that they had in the laptop they announced earlier this month. And but just for volume, it's important for them to get a new version of this in the market. And this is also the first launch that they've done of a product outside of the U.S. So there was a desire here to sort of show the importance of the Chinese market.
They're giving China a special version of Windows 10. They announced this in China. Why is that?
Well, so the Chinese government has not been willing to use either Windows 8 or Windows 10, which is obviously, we're talking the entire Chinese government, state, local, and as well as state-owned enterprises. So that closes off a huge market to Microsoft and to Windows if they won't use the two most recent versions. The Chinese government had cited security concerns. And so Microsoft's been working with the government for about 2 years to come up with a version that they're willing to use. And what they've done here is they've allowed the government to put on their own encryption. All updates are going to be delivered by a joint venture who's with Microsoft, but it's a Chinese company, and it means that the Chinese government doesn't have to send data outside of the country and doesn't have to have Microsoft kind of in their machines updating. They can also delete apps that they don't want to use, and so it gives them a greater degree of control. At the same time, obviously business in China for U.S. companies is fraught with concerns about civil liberties and blocking, so that's an issue for them.
All right, Dina Bass, our Seattle bureau chief, with that update on the Surface. Thanks so much, Dina, for joining us. Coming up, how the VC landscape in the UK compares to Silicon Valley and the sad diversity problem that plagues both. That is next. This is Bloomberg.
Hey, yeah, I am. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
It is obviously concerning.
We've been taking a look at the long-standing diversity problem in the technology industry, and this is a problem that's not limited to Silicon Valley. I want to get to Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde in London, who's been taking a close look at diversity in venture capital in the UK. Caroline?
Emily, yes, thank you very much indeed. And, well, it seems as though when it comes to boosting the number of women in tech, people often focus on how many females are in engineering or indeed leadership roles. But there's another key area in tech where women are significantly underrepresented. You just said it, it's venture capital. And a year-old not-for-profit diversity VC, as it's called, aims to bring more women and minorities into venture capital firms. And it just published first-of-its-kind data showing that 160 VC firms in the UK, of them, just 13% of VC investors in decision-making roles, partner, level or equivalent, are actually women. Now, I recently spoke with Diversity VC co-founder Francesca Warner and Harry Briggs, a Diversity VC advisor. And I started by, well, diving into the significance of those stats.
It is obviously a concerning statistic. When you compare that to the labour force in the UK in general, it's 47% women working across all industries. So we are quite a way behind. It's also worth saying that there's only 27% in the whole investment industry in terms of VC. So in investment teams particularly, it's kind of quite shocking that at senior levels, we just don't have those decision makers who are making the calls on investing in the companies that are going to be the biggest companies of the future of the UK economy.
And Harry, at the moment, as an acting partner, making decisions in which startups to be investing in and going forward, do you feel that this underrepresentation is changing the investment mode of certain funds? How would having a greater balance help the investment decision?
I think it's a big problem. I think one thing I found when I first came into VC and saw this very male environment was that you're meeting a company for the first time, an entrepreneur, and you're looking around the room and people are giving their views, and it's all white, straight males, and actually you're not getting that sort of breadth of opinion. When I'm making a decision about a company, because we're having to invest early stage, lots of uncertainty, we need lots of views around the table and lots of different segments of society represented. So if it's all just a certain sort of white male type, then we're not going to get those views represented. So we're going to make poorer decisions.
So too homogenous a decision-making process in the moment. Therefore, to compare it geographically, Francesca, for us, because how does this stack up UK versus the United States?
Yeah, so in the United States, the most recent statistics are that there are 11% female partner level employees in US VC, and so we're slightly ahead of them. However, if you take out the two biggest funds in our study that we looked at, you actually get down to the same number, that 11% number as well. So I think the difference is imperceptible, to be honest. I think they're both in a similar sort of space. I think looking at the broader VC investment picture, in the US, you have 45% women in the US industry versus only 27% in the UK. So we're far behind the US on that front as well.
And therefore, when you're looking at what therefore can be done to raise decision makers to be more balanced, whether it be on a female basis, on an ethnic basis, on whether you're hetero or homosexual as well, how are you going to make sure that diversity is something that's prioritised?
Yeah, so that's really the point of understanding what these numbers are. So when we first set up Diversity VC just about a year ago, there was absolutely no data on what the ratio was in the UK industry. So our first port of call was to do this study to understand what does gender look like in the UK. And that's given us quite a clear picture, and I think that's given us quite a clear target as well. So we have 20% target of senior women in investment roles by 2020. And that's really a call to arms for the industry to say, what are your initiatives that are going to help us achieve that? At Diversity VC, we have kind of 4 different areas that we're addressing that issue in. It's about attracting more women into the industry and more diversity into the industry. It's about retaining and promoting those women that already are in the industry so they can get up to senior roles. It's about accessing a broader ecosystem and so promoting diversity and entrepreneurship as well. And it's about continuing to collect data like this, so going beyond just gender in the UK, but looking at Europe and also looking beyond just gender. So as you said, race and ethnicity and educational background, industry background.
Francesca, as a female, you're associate at Downing Ventures. How do you think people could be accessed such as yourselves, are there practices that are already being used and to a significant advantage by certain venture funds to be able to bring in the right sort of talent that is diverse?
Yeah, I think one of the things is actually about going out and talking about what VC is as a career. So a lot of young people don't necessarily know it exists. They don't know how to prepare their CV. They don't know how to, meet people in the industry and even develop the first connections to, set up that interview. So what we're doing at Diversity VC is we're going out and talking at universities and at schools, putting people on stage, talking about how they got into the industry and kind of role modeling, I suppose. And that includes people like me. And my background before I came into venture wasn't the traditional route, and so talking about that and talking about the steps that I made, which were unconventional, I think gives some sense of a template to follow and hopefully inspires more young people to get into it.
Much more balance needed, Emily. Back to you.
All right, thanks so much, Caroline. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Remember, all episodes are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. That's all for now. This is Bloomberg.